So, welcome everyone yet again for another reading of Rabindranath Tagore's Religion of Man, where we are picking up where we left off, this time with chapter 4, titled Spiritual Union. I'm not going to really say too much because Rabindranath is going to poetically go through a lot of big ideas, I'm sure. And like last time, I suppose afterwards we will just unpack it and have a free flow discussion after reading a lot of these things. If somebody really has a pressing idea or a thought in the course of reading, feel free to just jump in, share a thought, but we'll try to get the whole across. Quan, is there anything you'd like to throw out there?
No, I just say let Tagore flows.
All right, let Tagore flow. Who would like to read today? Luke, did you read last week or
No,
you want to?
I can read.
Okay.
Chapter 4 Spiritual Union. Then man's preoccupation with the means of livelihood became less insistent. He had the leisure to come to the mystery of his own self, and could not help feeling that the truth of his personality had both its relationship and its perfection in an endless world of humanity. His religion, which in the beginning had its cosmic background of power, came to a higher stage when it found its background in the human truth of personality. It must not be thought that in this channel it was narrowing the range of our consciousness of the infinite. The negative idea of the infinite is merely an indefinite enlargement of the limits of things. In fact, a perpetual postponement of infinitude. I'm told that mathematics has come to the conclusion that our world belongs to a space which is limited. It does not make us feel disconsolate. We do not miss very much and need not have a low opinion of space. Even if a straight line cannot remain straight and has an eternal tendency to come back to the point from which it started. In the Hindu scripture, the universe is described as an egg. That is to say, for the human mind, it has its circular shell of limitation. The Hindu scripture goes still further and says that time also is not continuous, and our world repeatedly comes to an end to begin its cycle once again. In other words, in the region of time and space, infinity consists of ever-revolving finitude. But the positive aspect of the infinite is in Advaitam, in an absolute unity, in which comprehension of the multitude is not as in an outer receptacle, but as in an inner perfection that permeates and exceeds its contents, like the beauty in a lotus, which is ineffably more than all the constituents of the flower. It is not the magnitude of extension, but an intense quality of harmony, which evokes in us the positive sense of the infinite in our joy, in our love. For Advaitam is Anandam. The infinite one is infinite love.
Is
Though, yeah,
Anandam, does that mean infinite love?
No, Anandam is from Ananda, and Ananda means blissful.
Hmm. Okay.
And maybe since we are in those things, Advaitam, to be exact, doesn't mean absolute infinity, but means not two. Okay, non-duality. But not two is better because Advaitam it comes from Adwa, A-DWA, and Dwa for English speaker. You might guess that it's also the same than two.
Dua.
Yeah, Dwa, two. You know that Sanskrit is an Indo-European language, like English.
Very good to know.
For those among whom the spiritual sense is dull, the desire for realization is reduced to physical possession, an actual grasping in space. This longing for magnitude becomes not an aspiration towards the great, but a mania for the big. But true spiritual realization is not through augmentation of possession in dimension or number. The truth that is infinite dwells in the ideal of unity, which we find in the deeper relatedness. This truth of realization is not in space. It can only be realized in one's own inner spirit. What to do with this line? The infinite and eternal has to be known as one. Para akasat aja atma. This birthless spirit is beyond space, for it is Purusha. It is the person. The special mental attitude which India has in her religion is made clear by the word yoga, whose meaning is to effect union. Union has its significance not in the realm of to have, but in that of to be or not to be. To gain truth is to admit its separateness, but to be true is to become one with truth. Some religions, which deal with our relationship with God, assure us of reward if that relationship be kept true. This reward has an objective value. It gives us some reason outside ourselves for pursuing the prescribed path. But we have such religions also in India. But those that have attained a greater height aspire for their fulfillment in union with Narayana, the supreme reality of man, which is divine. Our union with this spirit is not to be attained through the mind, for our mind belongs to the department of economy in the human organism. It carefully husbands our consciousness for its own range of reason, within which to permit our relationship with the phenomenal world. But it is the object of yoga to help us to transcend the limits built up by mind. On the occasions when these are overcome, our inner self is filled with joy, which indicates that through such freedom, we come in touch with the reality that is an end in itself and therefore is bliss. Once man had his vision of the infinite in the universal light, and he offered his worship to the sun. He also offered his service to the fire with oblations. Then he felt the infinite in life, which is time, in its creative aspect. And he said, Yat kincha yadidam sarvam prana ijati nishritam. All that there is comes out of life and vibrates in it.
Do we know where these are from? These citations from is
Yeah, those citations are all from Patanjali's Yoga Sutra.
hmm.
And Yoga Sutra means the treatise on the union with absolute consciousness. Of course, Patanjali was not the only guy treating those things. I would say that the absolute quest of Indian civilization is yoga. Okay, so all the guy with a certain level of brains during the last 5,000 years in India devoted themselves to that quest.
Hmm. So yoga has, in this sense, I know so little, right? But a real theoretical foundation to it's not just the meditative and the exercises and the stretching and things like that. It's more than that. MC.
Matthew, thank you for your perfectly naive but sincere question, and I'm very grateful for that. It shows great courage and desire to learn something interesting, because what you said exactly is the what I would call the commercial um, offer that is given nowadays, maybe for the last 75 years to the West, and that deserves more the name of relaxation than meditation, because the true word in Sanskrit for meditation is dhyana, 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 and dhyana means absolute space. And the first line of the Yoga Sutra of Patanjali is uh, Yogash Yogash Chitta Vritti Nirodha. Okay, and those four words are very important, and I will write them in the chat. It means union with absolute consciousness is the cessation of the automatic change of mental activity or of automatic mental activities. And one of the most uh, stupid interpretation of that line, those four words, is that if you are union with consciousness, you will be completely gaga, stupid, or completely in disconnected from the phenomenal reality. Okay, and once again, it's the commercial offer that Westerners are used to during the last three generations. Okay, a bit connected with, I would say, some intel operations to dumb down the population too. Okay, that's my interpretation. True yoga, when yoga chitta vritti no nirodha, means that when you attain to true union with pure consciousness, on the contrary, your intellect wouldn't be sharper. Okay, you wouldn't have more imagination, you wouldn't have more capability to explore your inner reality and the outer physical reality. Okay, you would be better in terms of epistemological development. And once again, if I use a Platonic vocabulary, you would jump the famous dividing line from doxa opinion to episteme knowledge. You would not be, I wrote an article about the difference between instruction, things that will be stored in your mind consciously, subconsciously, or unconsciously, versus education, educare, to bring forth what is within. Precisely, if you are truly yogash chitta vritti nirodha, it means that you will have enough mental energy to jump the dividing line, to go from doxa to episteme, meaning going to dianoa, dialecticon, and theoria, if we borrow Plato's words.
That's great. And For anybody listening online, that referenced article will be in the description box of this video as well. That being said,
I pursue?
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you for giving me two. Yeah, exactly. And thanks for giving me 2 minutes to make that clearing for the dignity of yoga.
Yeah, I figured part of it is that I have these blind spots, and I'm sure that it's shared with a lot of people who will be listening to this too as blind spots. So it's good that you're able to just put some light onto the shadows there. Thank you.
Thanks.
All that there is.
Oh, wait, Jerry's got a thing.
No, to just go back a bit, I wanted to ask Juan, at the top of page 67, I know this is going back, but it says this birthless spirit is beyond space. It is Purusha, it is the person. What's that meant by the person, not what we think, just as a person, as an individual? Or do they mean something else by that?
It's a capital P, I notice.
Yeah. Once again, Purusha is the universal self. Okay. For Indian philosophy, you have a personality, which is precisely the product of your conditioning by your social society and by your family. Okay, and it corresponds to what Plato's call doxa, the opinion that you accumulated in your mind because your family, your friends, your teachers influenced you. Okay, the famous persona, okay, the mask of the Greek. And if you make an effort on yourself, you will do your things from what has been given to you by your family and society, and from that you will get an individuality. And if you go further, you will go to the Purusha precisely, which is the person. Okay, because that word person here doesn't have the same meaning than the legal meaning in the West. Okay, when we speak about a person in the West, it has a specific meaning in terms of laws. But this person here is the universal self, meaning precisely this birthless spirit, which is beyond space.
Is it my time
and which is brought forth by true education. Oh, sorry. And which is brought forth by a true education when you get to the dimension of truth, goodness, of beauty, goodness, and truth. If we go from the bottom to the top. Okay, sorry, Luke.
So he was. So what we do? The last thing I read was all that there is comes out of life and vibrates in it. He was sure of it, being conscious of life's mystery immediately in himself as the principle of purpose, as the organized will, the source of all his activities. His interpretation of the ultimate character of truth relied upon the suggestion that life had brought to him, and not the non-living, which is dumb. And then he came deeper into his being and said, Raso vai sa. The infinite is love itself, the eternal spirit of joy. His religion, which is in his realization of the infinite, began its journey from the impersonal Dios, the sky, wherein light had its manifestation. Then came to life, which represented the force of self-creation in time, and ended in Purusha, the person in whom dwells timeless love. It's said, Tam Vidyam Purusham Veda. Know him, the person, who is to be realized. Yata ma vo mrityu parivyatya, so that death may not cause you sorrow. For this person is deathless, in whom the individual person has his immortal truth. Of him it is said, Esha Devo Viva Karma Mahatma Sada Janamam Hridayi Sanivishata. This is the divine being, the world worker, who is the great soul, ever dwelling, inherent in the hearts of all people. Did you have a question, Matt? Did you have a question?
I have, there's ambiguities, but I'm holding it in my mind for after. Did you want me to ask a question?
No, I think when he saw you turning the page, he thought maybe.
Oh, I was just turning the page.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Ya etad vidur amritas te bhavanti. Those who realize him transcend the limits of mortality, not in duration of time, but in perfection of truth. Our union with a being whose activity is worldwide and who dwells in the heart of humanity cannot be a passive one. In order to be united with him, we have to divest our work of selfishness and become Visvakarma, the world worker. We must work for all. When I use the words for all, I do not mean for a countless number of individuals. All work that is good, however small in extent, is universal in character. Such work makes for a realization of Visvakarma, the world worker who works for all, in order to be one with this Mahatma, the great soul. One must cultivate the greatness of soul, which identifies itself with the soul of all peoples, and not merely with that of one's own. This helps us to understand what Buddha has prescribed as Brahma Vihara, living in the infinite. He says, do not deceive each other. Do not despise anybody, anywhere. Never in anger wish anyone to suffer through your body, words, or thoughts. Like a mother maintaining her only son with her own life, keep thy immeasurable loving thought for all creatures. Above thee, below thee, on all sides of thee, keep on all the world thy sympathy and immeasurable loving thought, which is without obstruction, without any wish to injure, without enmity. Did you change the page? Oh yeah. Okay, you're different pages. Okay. To be dwelling in such contemplation while standing, walking, sitting, or lying down until sleep overcomes thee is called living in Brahma. This proves that Buddha's idea of the infinite was not the idea of a spirit of an unbounded cosmic activity, but the infinite whose meaning is in the positive ideal of goodness and love, which cannot be otherwise than human. By being charitable, good, and loving, you do not realize the infinite in the stars or rocks, but the infinite revealed in man. Buddha's teaching speaks of nirvana as the highest end. To understand its real character, we have to know the path of its attainment, which is not merely through the negation of evil thoughts and deeds, but through the elimination of all limits to love. It must mean the sublimation of self in a truth, which is love itself, which unites in its bosom all those to whom we must offer our sympathy and service. When somebody asked Buddha about the original cause of existence, he sternly said that such questioning was futile and irrelevant. Did he not mean that it went beyond the human sphere as our goal? That though such a question might legitimately be asked in the region of cosmic philosophy or science, it had nothing to do with man's dharma, man's inner nature, in which love finds its utter fulfillment, in which all his sacrifice ends in an eternal gain, in which the putting out of the lamp light is no loss because there is the all-pervading light of the sun? And did those who listened to the great teacher merely hear his words and understand his doctrines? No, they directly felt in him what he was preaching, in the living language of his own person, the ultimate truth of man. It is significant that all great religions have their historic origin in persons who represented in their life a truth which was not cosmic and unmoral, but human and good. They rescued religion from the magic stronghold of demon force and brought it into the inner heart of humanity, into a fulfillment not confined to some exclusive good fortune of the individual, but to the welfare of all men. This was not for the spiritual ecstasy of lonely souls, but for the spiritual emancipation of all races. They came as the messengers of man to men of all countries and spoke of the salvation that could only be reached by the perfecting of our relationship with man, the eternal, man, the divine. Whatever might be their doctrines of God or some dogmas that they borrowed from their own time and tradition, their life and teaching had the deeper implication of a being who is the infinite in man, the Father, the friend, the lover, whose service must be realized through serving all mankind. For the God in man depends upon men's service and men's love for his own love's fulfillment. The question was once asked in the shade of the ancient forest of India, Kasmai Devaya Havicha Videma. Who is the God to whom we must bring our oblations? That question is still ours, and to answer it, we must know that in the depth of our love and the maturity of our wisdom, that what man is, know him not only in sympathy, but in science, in the joy of creation, and in the pain of heroism. Tena tyaktena bungchita. Enjoy him through sacrifice, the sacrifice that comes of love. Ma grida, covet not. Somebody can correct my pronunciation. For greed diverts your mind to that illusion, and you which is your separate self and diverts it from truth, in which you represent the Parama Purusha, the Supreme Person. Our greed diverts our consciousness to materials away from that supreme value of truth, which is the quality of the universal being. The gulf thus created by the receding stream of the soul we try to replenish with a continuous stream of wealth, which may have the power to fill but not the power to unite and recreate. Therefore, the gap is dangerously concealed under the glittering quicksand of things, which by their own weight cause a sudden subsidence while we are in the depths of sleep. The real tragedy, however, does not lie in the risk of our material security, but in the obscuration of man himself in the human world. In the creative activities of his soul, man realizes his surroundings as his larger self, instinct with his own life and love. But in his ambition, he deforms and defiles it with the callous handling of his voracity. His world of utility, assuming a gigantic proportion, reacts upon his inner nature and hypnotically suggests to him a scheme of the universe which is an abstract system. In such a world, there can be no question of mukti, the freedom in truth, because it is a solidly solitary fact, a cage with no sky beyond it. In all appearance, our world is a closed world of hard facts. It is like a seed which is tough cover, with its tough cover. But within this enclosure is working our silent cry of life for mukti, even when its possibility is darkly silent. When such huge, overgrown temptation tramples into stillness this living aspiration, then does civilization die like a seed that has lost its urging for germination. And this mukti is in the truth that dwells in the ideal man. I like this word mukti. Is that truth?
Liberation, a liberated person.
Liberated person.
I had thought that he was intervening because he was speaking to people at Oxford in England. And a long time, I had originally thought he was primarily intervening on the biases of sort of a Western Christian matrix of thinking by expounding upon the universality of these different faiths around the world and enlarging people's conceptions. But I'm realizing he's doing so much more than that, because he's intervening on people on a scientific level, as well as uh, different approaches, even in the Buddhist world, in the Indian, in the Hindu world, as well as in the Christian, and every sort of everybody in every walk of life is receiving, I think, a bit of an intervention in some ways if they've been thinking of their idea of how they relate to the infinite, to the universe, in a naive or overly utilitarian or materialistic way.
Yes, absolutely. I don't know if you remember, we had a discussion which resembled very much what we are talking now when we were reading Leibniz principles on metaphysics. Okay, we were discussing the fact that there are many pathways, but those many pathways lead us to the top of the mountain if you keep on the same pathways. And we are living in a world very much obsessed with diversity, uh, and that is true diversity. Okay, that's diversity of the pathways because we have a true diversity of cultures, of great cultures, and those. What is a great cultures after all? Okay, I would try my personal definition. A great culture, a great civilization is a civilization having created a pathway bringing you from the base of the mountain to the top of the mountain, or using Plato terminology, from Acacia to Theoria. And each of those pathways might differ in the minutiae, but the general result is the same. You call it Theoria or you call it Nirvana, it doesn't matter, okay? And Nirvana precisely means blowing out of the light of the candle, okay? But blowing out the light of the candle doesn't mean that you die. It means that you have access to the sun of the absolute. And when you have access to the sun of the absolute, as in Theoria, why would you need the little light of your candle?
Yeah, that metaphor that he had regarding the light of the candle and the light of the sun, because yeah, it was in the context of the connection we have as finite individuals to the divine and the eternal and the infinite. And in many ways this feels like Plato's Phaedo and the Timaeus, but from Tagore's voice and his unique soul. But when a lot of people have this idea, when I die, that's it, I'm dead, my candle is out. But if you, as he says, I forget the word he used, but if you become a world worker, if you tap into love, like true love, if that's what's animating you, even on a smaller amplitude or a larger amplitude, it could be small acts of true goodness. It partakes in that eternal character, and you are thus all your soul. It doesn't really, it's connected to that eternal light of the sun, even though your candle is out. You've participated and you've truly existed and lived truth. You're not just being truthful or gaining truth, like he says. It's not something you're adding onto yourself, but you are living truth at that point by being good and loving, which it changes your thinking, right? Because it's not like you're trying to build up karma points or build up, virtue points to get into heaven as something you're adding onto yourself, like a video game, but you're just being the good. It's a very different way of thinking.
Yeah, exactly. And I like your standpoint on the karmic points, okay? Because if you talk with people in the Eastern world that has been very influenced by that kind of idea, unhappily, most of them stay in the doxa kingdom, okay? They are building karma points precisely, rather than having a top-down vision that would bring them at once in the episteme kingdom, rather than rowing for eternity in the doxa kingdom.
Rowing for you. I like that image.
Well, it's kind of like it partakes in the Dante's purgatory vision too, right? It's better than hell, but you're not going to make it to heaven by collecting good little deeds of charity. You're just going to be rowing forever.
Visva.
Exact.
Visva karma.
Yeah. Hey, look, I think that you have a outstanding Sanskrit pronunciation.
Thank you very much.
Man of many talents.
My first Sanskrit reading day.
Must be must be one of your past life, Luke.
Yeah, well, it's easy with such a poet and a wise person to be reading his words like with delight. Like it's a pleasure to read.
Yeah.
So he makes it easy. Yeah.
Any other thoughts or anything?
Just a small detail, okay? Sometime I nitpick on them, small details, but it might be interesting. Um, at page 68, um, page 68, okay, a bit at the middle. If you count from the end, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, at the 12th line, but counting from the ends, you have began its journey from the impersonal Dios, Dyaus, the sky. Do you guys identify the word
Mhm.
Yeah.
Dios? Okay, so believe it or not, Dios is the root from which the word Zeus come from. Okay, the Jupiter of Greeks.
Wow.
Okay, so the complete name of Zeus is Dios Pitar, or Dios Pitar, meaning heavenly father. Okay, so Zeus is heavenly father. So the same than Jupiter. Okay, heavenly, Peter father. So Jupiter is heavenly father, and it's the same god than the Indian god, sky Indian god, Dios Pitar.
Are you sure? I thought Peter was rock.
No, no, not in Peter, like in English. Peter is rock. You're right, but the Peter in Jupiter is father.
Ah.
Okay, because
Oh,
Peter in
Pater,
Jupiter is not.
Pater. Yeah, right. Padre,
Yeah,
Pater.
it's
Yeah,
not
yeah. Right.
exact. Yes, exact. Because the Peter the apostle is Peter, but the Peter in Jupiter, as you know, is Piter. It's not the same.
Yeah, yeah, right. Interesting. Very interesting association. Huh. That's cool. What I really like too is the a lot of Westerners have, and I know for a long time I've always had this limited, wrong idea of Buddhism as being something which was more of a detachment from the material world as an ideal, a negation of the world, um, and an idea of like becoming one with this homogenous, uncharacteristic oneness, right? A very blah that you're becoming one with. It was very immoral, and that was something I think that's been shared by a lot of Western people over the years.
Mhm.
But he's introducing a much more uh, living, loving concept of the Buddha, a much more truthful, I'm sure, concept of the Buddha, um, by introducing the idea that no, the infinite is not unbounded; it's bounded by love. Like that's what the one and the infinite in this world that Tagore is introducing. It's bounded by love and goodness. Um, and the Buddha, by citing the words of the Buddha there that he picked, I mean, it was very Christ-like. I mean, it was very, very, uh, yeah. It was not the ignorant
Yes,
idea, like I said, that I've often encountered.
yes. Well, in Christianity, you have a minor version called quietisme in French. I think in English it's quietism. Does the word quietism sound a bell for you, Matt? Or for
Yeah. Oh, Jerry
okay,
does. Yep. Jerry says yes.
okay, okay. So I think that Jerry understand me perfectly then. So that quietist tendency in Christianity is the version that is offered to the Westerners uh, in understanding Hinduism or Buddhism. It's a very limited version of reality, of the reality of Buddhism or Hinduism, or to be precise, of Sanatana Dharma. Okay, because the Hindus don't call themselves Hindus, of course, because Hindu come from Sindhu, okay, which is a Sanskrit word meaning the seven rivers, okay, because the land where are those people uh, had seven rivers. One of the river is it's dry now. It's the Saraswati, but so Hindu come from Sindhu seven rivers, but their own teaching they don't call it according to the land. Okay, they call it the eternal laws, which is sanatana dharma in Sanskrit, and Buddhism is simply a more democratic Sanatana Dharma, if you want, because in high antiquity in India, you need to be in the three upper classes to receive religious and spiritual teaching. So the Buddhist movement was a kind of democratization of the spiritual teaching.
Yeah, in that sense, bringing the individual personalities, as well as he says towards the end of all great religions, they all have a personality who walks the walk as an exemplar of the great virtues of goodness and love. And it's not just like theory, or as he says, like it was liberated from the demonic sort of superstitions religion and brought into a higher degree of civilization by having exemplar people who, as finite individuals, participated so directly with the divine life that it gives us role models, or we can awaken that within ourselves when we have those individuals who do what they do. They suffer in life, and that's an important characteristic of the great religions.
You mean like the Pope, right?
Yeah. And he repeat what? What did you say, Luke?
I said,
what did you say?
You mean like the Pope, right?
Well, it's did you want? Do we want a debate?
This was just me being me. Yeah. I like to tease the Pope.
Well, that's a bit dangerous.
Well,
yeah.
You want a debate?
A debate?
That it might be dangerous is a second debate.
No, but obviously in religion, like Christianity, there's models like Jesus is the real dude, or like Saint Paul or somebody. There's all kinds of other people who are living through the religion. Like there's like an emancipation of this person. There's a model for all mankind, which is internal. Like you see the process is happening. I don't know if we see the process in Jesus because he's so good already, but isn't it Paul who falls off the horse, or Saul?
Well, yeah, Paul was Saul, right? He was. There's this transformation, this qualitative leap, this transformation from Saul being a butcher of Christians to becoming himself the leader of the movement when he goes through Syria. But yeah, I mean, I guess you got that too, right? With all of the great exemplars, there's a like even Christ had his moments of weakness, which are very, it's something that us finite people can connect with, because we all suffer weakness and fears and other things and temptations. And by giving him those experiences, it made it something you can connect with and see, okay, even Jesus, had his weaknesses and he overcame. So you have that, I'm sure, with the Buddha as well, all sorts of examples of the Buddha. I don't know, Kwan, what do we have a lot of examples like that of the Buddha as a man with his weaknesses and temptations and fears that he had to overcome?
Yeah, well, here we enter in a very difficult field because it's theology, okay? As with Christ, Buddha was born as a perfect being, but he reenacted the life of a human in flesh. Then he had his moment of anxiety and of doubt, okay? So, but here we are, that the theological interrogation is that either Buddha or Christ, because it can be asked for both of them, since they were born with absolute consciousness in their heart, do their sufferings the same than ours. Okay, that's the main question. But however, in terms of external behavior, according to what has been written down, uh, definitely there were episodes of anxiety and doubts uh, to which we can identify.
Okay. I also really liked the idea of the linear versus nonlinear space and time. It's such an important concept, and even in Plato's Timaeus, that Pythagorean idea was worked on quite a bit. Is there a quantization? Is there a cyclical? Is there a curvature to both space and also to time? And the way he treats it metaphorically by the turtle shell example, as like, it seemed on the surface that there are such things as straight lines, but science is showing us no line can be so straight that a straighter one cannot be created. And then you got this idea of a cyclical time as well, a curvature to time, that sort of sets the tone for the discussion of the boundary conditions, what shapes the boundary conditions of space-time, and also of the space-time of the soul, right? Of this question of love and goodness and beauty and truth, that are the boundary conditions.
Yes. And I would like to read 10 lines from pages 72, okay, because it goes back again to the agape notion, ran. And it's
Ran
page
is
72.
agape?
It's, yes, wow, that's Chinese, but I want to make the rapprochement with the Sanskrit tradition at the 1, 2, 3, the fourth paragraph. That question is still, okay, well, who is the God to whom we must bring our oblation? That question is still ours. And to answer it, we must know in the depth of our love and the maturity of our wisdom what man is. Know him not only in sympathy, but in science, in the joy of creation. Okay, the joy of creation, that is agape, or ran, or goodness, and pain of heroism. Tina tiak tina bunch ta. Enjoy him through sacrifice that comes of love. Ma grida, covet not, for greed diverts your mind to that illusion in which you view your spirit self, and diverts it from truth in which you represent the Parama Purusha, the Supreme Person. Okay? And once again, I remind that in chapter 1, he was stating very clearly that the subject of this book is the eternal man, or divine man, or the divinity in man.
Mm-hmm.
Or the Parama Purusha, according to the Indian jargon, the Supreme Person, the universal self. And it goes back also to the metaphysic principles by Leibniz, okay, the supermonad. And if I would equate Leibniz monad to the individuality.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And the supermonad, of course, is obvious, is the Paramapsha, the supreme person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the divine mind or spirit. Oh, it's very good. Do we want to? It's 9 o'clock. I mean, that was a very small chapter. We could feasibly. I can see how long the next chapter is, but would that be something you guys want to do?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's do it.
We could start it. Yeah.
Cool. Who wants to read chapter 5? Jerry, you got a new microphone.
I can do that. My internet connection is kind of funny tonight.
Jerry?
So, yes.
Yeah, that was a bit of a weak connection. We'll try it a little bit, but that was choppy. So read for a few lines and let's see how it sounds. And read directly into your mic.
Okay. Okay, I'll try it, but it's kind of been cutting in and out for me this evening, but
Okay.
just let me know how it
If it gets
goes.
too bad, we'll jump to a backup, a spare tire. Yeah.
All right, I can be replacements for the tire. Okay, chapter 5, the prophet. I have stated that the universe to which we are related through our sense perception, reason, or imagination is necessarily man's universe. Our physical self gains strength and success through its correct relationship in knowledge and practice with its physical aspect. The mysteries of all its phenomena are generalized by man as laws, which have harmony with the rational mind. In the primitive period of our history, man's physical dealings with the external world were most important for the maintenance of his life, the life which he has in common with other creatures. And therefore, the first expression of his religion was physical. It came from his sense of wonder and awe at the manifestations of power in nature, and his attempt to win it for himself and his tribe by magical incantations. In other words, his religion tried to gain a perfect communion with the mysterious magic of nature's forces through his own power of magic. Then came the time when he had the freedom of leisure to divert his mind to his inner nature, and the mystery of his own personality gained for him its highest importance. And instinctively, his personal self sought its fulfillment in the truth of a
Jerry is frozen.
Oh, Jerry?
yes.
Yeah, you were frozen there for about 5 seconds. Unfortunately, I think we're gonna have to break out the spare reader.
Higher.
I think Eureka wanted to listen in because she's busy right now or working. Desiree, would you like to read?
Oh, sure, I can do that. Can you guys hear me?
Very well.
Yes.
Okay. I will continue then.
Yep.
Something with a higher personality. In the history of religion, our realization of its nature has gone through many changes, even like our realization of the nature of the material world. Our method of worship has followed the course of such changes, but its evolution has been from the external and magical towards the moral and spiritual significance. The first profound record of the change of direction of man in man's religion we find in the message of the great prophet in Persia, Zarathustra. And as usual, it was accompanied by a revolution. In a later period, the same thing happened in India, and it is evident that the history of this religious struggle lies embedded in the epic Mahabharata associated with the name of Krishna and the teachings of Bhagavad Gita. The most important of all outstanding facts of Iranian history is the religious reform brought about by Zarathustra. There can be hardly any question that he was the first man we know who gave a definitely moral character and direction to religion, and at the same time preached the doctrine of monotheism, which offered an external foundation of reality to goodness as an ideal of perfection. All religions in the primitive type try to keep men bound with regulations of external observations. Zarathustra was the greatest of all the pioneer prophets who showed the path of freedom to man, the freedom of moral choice. the freedom from the blind obedience to unmeaning injunctions, the freedom from the multiplicity of shrines which draw our worship away from the single minded chastity of devotion. To most of us, it sounds like a truism today when we are told that the moral goodness of a deed comes from the goodness of intention. But it is a truth which once came to man like a revelation of light in the darkness, and it has not yet reached all the obscure corners of humanity. We still see around us men who fearfully follow, hoping thereby to gain merit, the path of blind formalism, which has no living moral source in the mind. This will make us understand the greatness of Zarathustra. Though surrounded by believers in magical rites, he proclaimed in those dark days of unreason that religion has its truth in its moral significance, not in external practices of imagery or imaginary value, that its value is in upholding man in his life of good thoughts, good work, good words, and good deeds. The prophet, says Dr. Giger, qualifies his religion as unheard of words, Yasna 31.1, or as a mystery, the Yasna 48.3, because he himself regards it as as a religion quite distinct from the belief of the people hitherto. The revelation he announces is to him no longer a matter of sentiment, no longer a merely undefined presentiment and conception of the Godhead, but a matter of intellect, of spiritual perception and knowledge. This is of great importance, for there are probably not many religions of so high antiquity in which this fundamental doctrine that religion is a knowledge of learning, a science of what is true, is a precisely declared is so precisely declared as in the tenets of the Gathas. It is the unbelieving that are unknowing. On the contrary, the believing are learned because they have penetrated into this knowledge. It may be incidentally mentioned here as showing the parallel to this in the development of Indian religious thought, that all through the Upanishad spiritual truth is termed with a repeated emphasis, vidya, knowledge, which has for its opposite avidya, acceptance of error born of unreason. The outer expression of truth reaches its white light of simplicity through its inner realization. True simplicity is the physiognomy of perfection. In the primitive stages of spiritual growth, when man is dimly aware of the mystery of the infinite in his life and the world, when he does not fully know the inward character of his relationship with this truth, his first feeling is either of dread or of greed of gain. This drives him into wild exaggeration in worship, frenzied convulsions of ceremonialism. But in Zarathustra's teachings, which are best reflected in his Gathas, we have hardly any mention of the ritualism of worship. Conduct and its moral motives have there received almost the sole attention. The Orthodox Persian form of worship in ancient Iran included animal sacrifices and offerings of hema to the devas. That all these should be discountenanced by Zarathustra not only shows his courage, but the strength of his realization of the Supreme Being as spirit. We are told that it has been mentioned by Plutarch that Zarathustra taught the Persians to sacrifice to Ahura Mazda, vows, and thanksgivings. The distance between faith in the efficiency of the bloodstained magical rites and cultivation of the moral and spiritual ideals as the true form of worship is immense. It is amazing to see how Zarathustra was the first among men who crossed this distance with a certainty of realization which imparted such a fervor of faith to his life and his words. The truth which filled his mind was not a thing which he borrowed from books or received from teachers. He did not come to it by following a prescribed path of tradition, but it came to him as an illumination of his entire life, almost like a communication of his universal self to his personal self. And he proclaimed this utmost immediacy of his knowledge when he said, "When I conceived of thee, O Master, as the very first and the last, as the most adorable one, as the father of the good thought, as the creator of truth and right, as the Lord judge of our actions in life, then I made a place for thee in my very eyes." Yasna 31:8. Translation D.J. Irani. It was the direct stirring of his soul which made him say, "Thus do I announce the Creator of all. I weave my songs of praise for him through truth, helpful and beneficent of all that live. Let Ahura Mazda listen to them with his Holy Spirit, for the good mind instructed me to adore him. By his wisdom, let him teach me about what is best." Yasna 45:6, translation D.J. Irani.
I didn't realize that Zarathustra. I'm sorry, I'm just going to chime in quickly with the thought. But that he was that I didn't know that we knew anything about him as a reformer, reforming the ritualistic older religions that were demanding. I guess he's implying here things like blood sacrifice in favor of, how does he word it? Vows of thanksgiving. But I never thought of Zarathustra that way before. I guess it's a bit of a mystery how I didn't really have a strong idea. But that's
he apparently he brought the concept of when everybody was sort of tribal. He tried to bring in individual thought, that we all have a mind of our own and we have to think, so we should think for ourselves. And in thinking for ourselves, we take our own responsibility for it. Anyway, I should go on. The truth which is not reached through the analytical process of reasoning and does not depend for proof on some corroboration of outward facts or the prevalent faith and practice of the people. The truth which comes like an inspiration out of context with its surroundings brings with it an assurance that it has been sent from an inner source of divine wisdom, that the individual who has realized it is specially inspired and therefore has his responsibility as a direct medium of communication of divine truth. As long as man deals with his God as the dispenser of benefits only to those of his worshippers who know the secret of propitiating him, he tries to keep him for his own self or for the tribe, or for the tribe to which he belongs. But directly the moral nature, that is to say, the humanity of God, is apprehended, man realizes his divine self in his religion. His God is no longer an outsider to be propitiated for a special concession. The consciousness of God transcends the limitations of race and gathers together all human beings within one spiritual circle of union. Zarathustra was the first prophet who emancipated religion from the exclusive narrowness of the tribal God, the God of a chosen people, and offered it the universe universal man. This is a great fact in the history of religion. The master said when the enlightenment came to him. I should mention that I did read a study on Dr. Irani about Zarathustra, so I knew a little more about him then. And here you're giving me this to read, which I find so interesting, so appropriate, and what I'm enjoying very much. Verily, I believe thee, O Ahura Mazda, to be the supreme benevolent providence. Whence Raosha came to me with a good mind, when first I received and became wise with your words. And though the task be difficult, though woe may come to me, I shall proclaim to all mankind thy message, which thou declarest to be the best. The thing that I see here, when he says, though woe may come to me, is that I find that a lot of the prophets, they eventually get killed. People kill them because they don't really understand the message.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he praised the Mazda.
You're right. But there's also a self-awareness they seem to have a prescient insight that is the consequence that they're willing to accept.
Yes.
Like going back into the cave, like even Socrates talks, or Plato talks about it in the cave, right? When he describes how now that you've seen the light, to be a true philosopher, you have to risk death, which they probably will want to kill you to go back into the cave to be a conduit to help other people want to escape the shadows as well, at the cost of your life.
Yes, I think that's why we all shy away from prophesying or doing what is too much right, because we don't want to be killed. Anyway, he praised the Mazda. This I ask thee, tell me truly, O Ahura, the religion that is best for all mankind, the religion which, based on truth, should prosper in all that is ours, the religion which establishes our actions in order and justice by the divine songs of perfect piety, which has for its intelligent desire of desires the desire for thee, O Mazda. Yasna 4410, translation D. J. Irani. With the undoubted assurance and hope of one who has got a direct vision of truth, he speaks to the world. Hearken unto me, ye who come from near and far, and from far. Listen, for I shall speak forth now. Ponder well over all things. Weigh my words with care and clear thought. Never shall the false teacher destroy this world for a second time, for his tongue stands mute, his creed exposed. Yasna 45, 1 translation D. I think it can be said without doubt that such a high conception of religion, uttered in such a clear note of affirmation with a sure note of conviction that it is a truth of the ultimate ideal of perfection which must be revealed to all humanity, even at the cost of martyrdom, it is unique in the history of any religion belonging to such a remote dawn of civilization. There was a time when, along with other Aryan peoples, the Persian who worshipped the elemental gods of nature, whose favor was not to be won by any moral duty performed or service of love. That in fact was the crude beginning of the scientific spirit trying to unlock the hidden sources of power in nature. But through it all, there must have been some current of deeper desire which constantly contradicted the cult of power and indicated worlds of inner good infinitely more precious than material gain. Its voice was not strong at first, nor was it needed, or was it heeded by the majority of the people, but its influences, like the life within the seed, were silently working. Then comes the great prophet, and in his life and mind, the hidden fire of truth suddenly bursts out into flame. The best in the people works far works for long, obscure ages in hints and whispers, till it finds its voice, which can never again be silenced. For that voice becomes the voice of man, no longer confined to a particular time or people. It works across intervals of silence and oblivion, depression and defeat, and comes out again with its conquering call. It is a call to the fighter against untruth, against all that lures away man's spirit from its high mission of freedom into the meshes of materialism. Zarathustra's voice is still a living voice, not alone, not alone a matter of academic interest for historical scholars to deal with the facts of the past, nor merely in the guide of a small community of men in the daily details of their life. Rather, of all teachers, Zarathustra was the first who addressed his words to whole humanity, regardless of distance or of space or time. He was not like a cave dweller who, by some chance of friction, had lighted a lamp and, fearing lest it could not be shared with all, secured it with the miser's care for his own domestic use. But he was the watcher in the night who stood on the lonely peak facing the east and broke out singing the paeans of light to the sleeping world when the sun came out on the brim of the horizon. The Sun of Truth is for all, he declared. Its light is to unite the far and the near. Such a message always arouses the antagonism of those whose habits have become nocturnal, whose vested interest is in the darkness. And there was a bitter fight in the lifetime of the prophet between his followers and the others who were addicted to the ceremonies that had tradition on their side and not truth. Is that it?
Yep.
There's more?
Yep.
We are told that Zarathustra was descended from a kingly family, and also that the first converts to his doctrine were the ruling caste. But the priesthood, the Kavis, and the Karapans often succeeded in bringing the rulers over to their side. So we find that in this fight, the princes of the land divided themselves into two opposite parties, as we find in India in the Kurukshetra war. It has been a matter of supreme satisfaction to me to realize that the purification of faith, which was a mission of the great teachers in both communities in Persia and in India, followed a similar line. We have already seen how Zarathustra spiritualized the meaning of sacrifice, which in former days consisted in external ritualism entailing bloodshed. The same thing we find in the Gita, in which the meaning of the word yajna has been translated into a higher significance than it had in its crude form. According to the Gita, the deeds that are done solely for the sake of which are done solely for the sake of self, fetter or soul. The disinterested action performed for the sake of the giving up of the self is the true sacrifice. For creation itself comes of the self-sacrifice of Brahma, which has no other purpose, and therefore, in our performance of the duty, which is self-sacrificing, we realize the spirit of Brahma. The ideal of Zoroastrian Persia is distinctly ethical. It sends its call to men to work together with the eternal spirit of God in spreading and maintaining, etc., the kingdom of righteousness against all attacks of evil. This ideal gives us our place as collaborators with God in distributing his blessings over the world. Clear is this to the man of wisdom as to the man who carefully thinks. He who upholds truth with all the might of his power. He who upholds truth, the utmost in his words and deed. He indeed is thy most valued helper, O Master Ahura. It is a fact of supreme moment to us that the human world is in an incessant state of war between that which will save us and that which will drag us into the abyss of disaster. Our one hope lies in the fact that Ahura Mazda is on our side if we choose the right course. The active, heroic aspect of this religion reflects the character of the people themselves, who later on spread conquest far and wide and build up great empires by the might of their sword. They accepted this world in all seriousness. They had their zest in life and confidence in their own strength. They belonged to the western half of Asia, and their great influence traveled through the neighboring civilization of Judea towards the western continent. Their ideal was the ideal of the fighter, by force of will and deeds of sacrifice. They were the conqueror Habitat. Welfare in this world and Amiratat immortality of the other. This is the best ideal in the West, the great truth of fight. For paradise has to be gained through conquest. That sacred task is for the heroes who are to take the right side in the battle and right weapons. There was a heroic period in Indian history when this holy spirit of fight was invoked by the greatest poet of the Sanskrit literature. It is not to be wondered at that his ideal of fight was similar to the idea that Zarathustra preached. The problem with which this poem starts is that paradise has to be rescued by the hero from its invasion by evil beings. This is the eternal problem of man. The evil spirit is exultant, and paradise is lost when Sati, the spirit of Sat, reality, is disunited from Shiva, the spirit of goodness. The real and the good must meet in wedlock if the hero is to take his birth in order to save all that is true and beautiful. When the union was attempted through the agency of passion, the anger of God was aroused, and the result was a tragedy of disappointment. At last, by purification through penance, the wedding was effected. The hero was born who fought against the forces of evil, and paradise was regained. This is the poem of the ideal of the moral fight, whose first great prophet was Zarathustra. We must admit that this ideal has taken a stronger hold upon the life of man in the West than in India. The West, where the vigor of life receives its fullest support from nature, and the excess of energy finds its delight in ceaseless activities. But everywhere in the world, the unrealized ideal is a force of disaster. It gathers its strength in secret, even in the heart of prosperity, kills the soul first, and then drives men to their utter ruin. When the aggressive activity of will, which naturally accompanies physical vigor, fails to accept the responsibility of its ideal, it breeds unappeasable greed for material gain, leads to unmeaning slavery of things, till amidst a raging conflagration of clashing interests, the tower of ambition topples down to the dust. And for this, the prophetic voice of Zarathustra reminds us that all human activities must have an ideal goal, which is an end to itself, and therefore is peace, is immortality. It is the house of songs, the realization of love, which comes through strenuous service of goodness. All the joys of life which thou holdest, O Master, the joys that were, the joys that are, and the joys that shall be, thou dost a proportion all in thy love for us. We, on the other hand, in the tropical East, who have no surplus of physical energy, inevitably overflowing in utter activities, also have our own ideal given to us. Our course is not so much through the constant readiness to fight in the battle of the good and evil as through the inner concentration of mind, through pacifying the turbulence of desire, to reach a serenity of the infinite in our being, which leads to the harmony in the all. Here, likewise, the unrealized ideal pursues us with its malediction. As the activities of a vigorous vitality may become unmeaning and thereupon smother the soul with a mere multiplicity of material, so the peace of the extinguished desire may become the peace of death, and the inner world in which we would dwell become a world of incoherent dreams. The negative process of curbing desire and controlling passion is only for saving our energy from dissipation and directing it into its proper channel. If the path or the channel we have chosen runs within words, it also must have its expression in action, not for any ulterior reward, but for the proving of its own truth. If the test of action is removed, if our realization grows purely subjective, then it may become like traveling in a desert in the night, going round and round the same circle, imagining all the while that we are following the straight path of purpose. This is why the prophet of the Gita in the first place says, "Whoso forsakes all desires and goeth onwards, free from yearnings, selfless and without egoism, he goes to peace." But he does not stop here. He adds, "Surrendering all actions to me with thy thoughts, resting on the Supreme Self, from hope and egoism freed, and of mental fever cured, engage in battle." Action there must be, fight we must have, not the fight of passion and desire or arrogant self assertion, but of duty done in the presence of the eternal, the disinterested fight of the serene soul that helps us in our union with the Supreme Being. In this, the teaching of Zarathustra's sacred gospel of fight ends its unity. The end of the fight, he preaches, is in the house of songs. In the symphony of spiritual union, he sings, "Ye who wish to be allied to the good mind, to be friend with truth, ye who desire to sustain the holy cause, down with all anger and violence, away with all ill will and strife, such benevolent men, O Master, I shall take to the house of songs." The detailed facts of history, which are the battleground of the learned, are not my province. I am a singer myself, and I am never attracted by the strains that come forth from the house of songs. When the streams of ideals that flow from the east and from the west mingle their murmur in some profound harmony of meaning, it delights my soul. In the realm of material property, men are jealously proud of their possessions and their exclusive rights. Unfortunately, there are quarrelsome men who bring that pride of acquisition, the worldliness of sectarianism, even into the religion, even into the region of spiritual truth. Would it be sane if the man in China should lay claim to the ownership of the sun because he can prove the earlier sunrise in his own country? For myself, I feel proud whenever I find that the best in the world have their fundamental agreement. It is their function to unite and to dissuade the small from bristling up like prickly shrubs in the pride of their minute points of their differences, only to hurt one another.
Very nice.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, hey, Young Hong.
Thank you for letting me read that. It really was interesting. I haven't read it before, although I have his book. So it's this, especially this chapter.
What is the primary text in that we were reading from Zarathustra's writings? Like, what's their Bible?
I think I did read his listen to his videos on it. Zarathustra came when the world needed a prophet, and he came into Iran. He was an Iranian, and Ahura Master means Lord of Truth, and he is supposed to be God, supreme being.
Mhm.
And he came when it was all tribal, apparently, and he tried to show that we all have a mind of our own, and we should start thinking for ourselves. And Dr. Irani gave an example of Zarathustra's daughter, telling her that it was time she was getting married, and she had to choose a husband, and he tried to guide her into the kind of husband to choose, but she had to make up her own mind on who she wanted to marry with what he had, the knowledge, the guidance he gave her, but she had to choose. And so in choosing for herself, he was introducing, you have to think for yourself, you have to think it for yourself, and whatever decision you make, it's your responsibility. You have to shoulder that responsibility. So he was bringing that idea from tribal concept, where you follow the leader, you follow everybody else, what your parents said, what the tribal leader said, to following your own mind.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of the things he came in with.
That's pretty disruptive and revolutionary.
It is very.
Yeah. Yeah.
It will cause a lot of problems.
I could see that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I find a lot of prophets like that, they eventually get killed. When you think of all of them.
Is that what happened to Zarathustra himself, or
I think he did. I think I think that's what happened to him.
Oh, yeah.
I should check it out.
Mm-hmm.
I've always had a fear of suffering. Not a fear of dying, but a fear of suffering. I mean, if they killed you outright, fine. But if you have to suffer, if they kept you alive and you're treated badly or whatever, you suffer.
Yeah, no, I understand that. I feel the same way too. It's the fear of death isn't such a big deal. It's the pain that tends to go with it that one doesn't look forward to very much.
No.
Yeah, that's But this whole idea of fight, what is he? Because in this chapter, he's referring to the fighting spirit, the conquering spirit that is more energized in the West, less so in the East, but obviously can be corrupted very easily, as he made reference to conquest, materialism, things that just cause imperialism and destruction. But what is this good quality of fight that he seems to say is healthy?
You have to fight if it's
the
other thing, it's if it's a truth. You have to stand up for the truth, and you have to speak always the truth, and speak the truth. So even if it costs you your life, You have to speak the truth. That's what he was preaching. His main message was on that. And he gave examples to, like, if you're in court and you have a representative and somebody is trying to gain something for themselves, if it's not truthful, if it's going to hurt somebody else, it's wrong. You have to speak the truth, even for other people, not just for yourself. If you see something is wrong, being done wrong to somebody, you have to speak up.
Right. Well, that I guess, yeah, he made reference to that on page 79, where he describes like the mandate of those who access when there's nothing in the external world that gives empirical validation. I mean, these are my words now, that describing how he was speaking, but when there's nothing external, but somebody of as it's called the prophet, right? So that's the name of this chapter. So somebody who qualifies as that characteristic of prophet emerges, it's because there's something internally that they understand, which cannot have come from their senses.
True.
And they're then they see themselves as responsible, or their duty is to be a medium of communicating that to the world, and not just to a particular tribe, which is, I guess, the problem with a lot of these, like, God is the chosen, my tribe's chosen God, or we're the chosen people for this version of God. It's very different from the Zarathustra, Zoroastrian innovation, which was a God for all of humanity, which is, yeah, much more universal.
He says too that we instinctively know what is right and what is wrong, and we should follow our instincts to do what's right.
Right. Any other what do you guys think?
Anybody else have thoughts?
Maybe a word on the notion of good fight. Because at the page 87, he was speaking of the proper channel, precisely, to bring your energy to the proper channel, and that proper channel precisely is the good fight. Or maybe, to use a word that doesn't have a good image nowadays, is precisely the word jihad. Okay, jihad is for a fight, but most of the time people think to the word jihad in relation to the outside fight, but the true jihad is precisely that inner epistemological evolution or development, or the journey of the soul, which is the good fight.
Doesn't jihad mean fighting for Islam so that they can bring people onto their side? Isn't that what the jihad is?
That's the bad interpretation, or the minor interpretation of jihad, because I think that you're right to bring that on the forefront. It is exact that there is, politically speaking, there is a political jihad, okay, meaning that you have to conquer the people who are not Muslim, okay, in order to bring them under the house of peace. Because in Islam, there's a notion of, I forgot the name in Arabic, but it's the house of peace and the house of war. And the people who are not in Islam is considered in the domain of war, because they are to be conquered. But of course, I would dare to say that it's the minor jihad, meaning that it's the lower interpretation. Because the jihad, the good fight, to use Tagore's terminology, is the inner effort to go higher in the epistemological journey, to speak like Plato, or to speak like many spiritual traditions, to strive to give your energy, to direct your energy to the proper channel, to the journey of the soul, to go to the Ahura Mazda, if you want, to go to the Lord of Truth, or to truth, or to the Son of the Absolute. Okay, I sometimes I mix the vocabulary of many traditions, but it goes to the same thing.
Mm.
But you're right to say that there's a political jihad, of course.
I didn't know there was a difference. I just thought that jihad was jihad, and it was all for the one.
Yes,
Good
and
to know that
let's not
there's a
forget that.
difference.
Yes, but I would say that in all great civilization, there's always the proposition of a good fight versus the external fight. Okay,
Yeah.
and let's not be too naive and too pinky in our outlook of reality. It's true that in the world, and I think that I we tend to invite people to go to the higher journey of creation and of having the common adventure, okay, of discovery, inventivity, and creativity. That is the big jihad, the true jihad, or the big fight, the good fight.
Mhm.
But there's a true historical development that we cannot escape, okay? And
Mhm.
that true historical geopolitical development is what is happening in the world of flesh and matter. And as long as we cannot bring most of human beings from opinion to knowledge, there will still be tribal fights. Okay, when you said that Zarathustra brought that extraordinary idea that you should not listen to your tribe, but rather to your own inner soul.
Mm.
I suppose that I cannot give an exact number, but I don't think that more than 50% of the people of that time listened to him. I think that we can hypothesize that probably it was less than 20% of the people of that time who listened to him. And I
Mm.
think that the historical development that we have under our eyes now is precisely that the dance, that dialectics between the small jihad, the outside fight, and the big jihad, the true fight for goodness, beauty, and truth inside all of us. And I would hypothesize that if it happens in more than 35% of mankind, it would be a turning point for our historical development.
Yeah, it sure would be.
Well, yeah, I mean, if you could get it, we underestimate how few people, it seems, really do act for the good and their conscience according to an inner directedness versus external stimulations of how I want to be seen, or how much some material, or even, you know, like we're talking false spiritual motive, right? Like good karma points, or I want to get to heaven, so I want to do these good things. But it becomes sort of like a I must do this versus I want to do this. It's not equivalent, though the same action gets the same material effect, you know, walking an old lady across the street, or, you know, volunteering at a food bank. Like, two people could do each of those things,
Mm.
but one of them, it's not coming from a place of honesty, the other it is. And so, like he said, the idea of intention we take for granted. Like, intention is the cause of goodness or its absence in a deed. And we take it for, like, we use the word, we say that so much, but how few people actually live accordingly. It's yeah, it's hard to imagine.
Mm.
But yeah, this question of real, genuine love is very important.
Can we all feel that for each other?
I hope so.
Mhm.
Yeah. Just a small detail. The house of peace is Dar an Islam, and the house of war is Dar an Harb.
Mm.
Okay, and those distinctions once again has a simple political meaning. Okay, and it's geopolitics, and it has a deeper meaning, which is the epistemological development. And precisely, we are very influenced by the LaRouche movement in our group, and the people from the LaRouche movement, one of them of their catchphrase is precisely to set aside geopolitics for creativity. But that's the adventure of the humankind, I suppose.
Mm.
I think Tagore would agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Well, Lyndon LaRouche is a kind of Western Tagore, if you want.
In some
Oh.
ways, yeah. Never heard it, never thought of it that way. But yeah, like absolutely, when you read Tagore's writings, it's just so in tune with the sorts of things I've been familiar with by reading Cusa or Plato or LaRouche. There's just so much of the same character expressing itself because it's the same universal truths that are being dealt with and worked on from somebody who really does care about humanity and has made the same sort of discovery or insight into the nature of creation.
Yeah. That's why the dumbing down is very important, because the more you dumb people down, the less they are truly educated and the more they will listen to their tribal leaders.
Yes,
Right.
exactly.
Very good point.
And we have very big tribes nowadays, of course. Okay, when I say tribe, there's no demeaning intention from myself. Okay, tribe simply means an identification, a deep and unconscious identification to a group, and that group could be 20,000 or 200 million or 1 billion, of course.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, it's part of this I guess like this multicultural mosaic relativism, which has really taken over in the past few decades, where it's like everyone is trained to shape their identities around just those who have the same opinions as they do or the same tastes or something, in your social media network, and your whole identity is crafted around I guess the sort of thing you see in a high school cafeteria. You got your different cliques, right? Your different little mini microcosms of little cultures that all like conglomerate in a field together, and there's such a littleness of identity in that type of environment where everyone just wants to be seen as a projection or a mask, and there's not a lot of sense of universality that exists, and the whole way our society is managed according to everyone who watches MSNBC or Fox. They will all tend to be in the same tribe, and they'll have the same sort of triggers that their group will move according to.
Exactly, yes.
Or you could trigger a color revolution that way too. If you don't like a government, you could sort of probe those types of buttons to get the group to move in a certain direction in a violent way,
Mm.
if you want to get a geopolitical effect.
I don't really understand what they mean by color revolutions. What is the meaning of color there?
You want to go for it, Quan? or Cynthia or Jerry or Luke?
I would take 30 seconds, and we would take our turn to give a definition. Okay, let's have a play. 30 seconds ish.
30 seconds
Okay.
each. Okay.
Okay. So a color revolution is an operation to destabilize a government by using certain dissatisfaction that are true in a country, but by amplifying them using psychological operations and controlling the international media. Why color? Because it has been given, each of the revolutions have been given a color like orange or pink, so on, just to have just like a code operation in a war operation, because it's a war operation using psychological manipulations and media control. And I think I exhausted my 30 seconds.
Hey, you also exhausted the topic quite a bit for the rest of us. I would just add that the use of color or a symbol, like in Philippines in 1989 was yellow, and they had a certain symbol of a tree. But there's something that is usually profiled in various cultures. Like in Iran, it's the Green Revolution that they tried to overthrow the government a few years ago there. In Russia, the White Revolution is what they tried to use around the color white. So they try to find a psychological expression in a symbol or a color to have the people rally around, kind of like a flag almost, that gives them meaning. It's kind of like like why you have like a red little blanket when you do bullfighting and you want to get the bull to run towards the red.
Yes. Okay. Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah. I think, Desiree, that you seems to be open to geopolitics. You would have much fun. But
I hear it all the time from Matthew. Get from all his emails.
So I think that you should read under the big topics called deep state. I think that you have for at least a year of reading under the topic of deep state.
And deep state is, all these terms, color revolution, deep state, so many other things are so common. You hear them so often now that you never used to hear before.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. You have, of course, the excellent articles by Matthew and Cynthia. Of course, that would be my first recommendation. A second recommendation would be Harley Schlanger. Do you know Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche movement?
Not really.
Oh, okay. So Schlanger is
I'll send you some
sorry, Matt.
On YouTube.
Yeah, I'll send you some links, Desiree. It's there's some good briefings there. Some good daily updates he gives.
Okay. It is so many things to read, so much knowledge to absorb. Anyway, I want to thank you for letting me read this chapter in particular. It was really surprised me, because it's something I've been reading about before and thinking of, and now I get a chance to read it here.
Well, thank you for actually doing the hard work reading it, and you did a really great job. You're a very good reader. So this is good. I'm really excited to see where he keeps going with this. And I know we had originally talked about maybe just doing the first 5 or 6 or 7 chapters, but I'm more inclined at this point just to read the whole book. It's so rich. What do you think? Should we read the whole book, or should we stop at a certain point and go to something?
No. If you want to invest that book, I think it's a good idea, okay? Because Indian philosophy, when spoken by a poet, doesn't have the dry side of a technical treatise, okay? But at the same time, he gives enough hints to the technical treatise, and I would be the bad guy that would stop you people to introduce the technical words.
That's cool. That's very sacrificing.
And I know. And And I would like to suggest, I don't know if you remember the short text that I sent to you about the Divine Melody, which is a song by Kabir.
Oh, but with the Osho commentary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not an emergency, but I would suggest that maybe at the middle of the reading of Kabir, we take 1 or 2 sessions to read those maybe 10 pages, because it would be a very interesting contrast between two poets, because Kabir was also a poet of the 15th century and also an Indian. And that Divine Melody has the extraordinary advantage of being very poetical, and at the same time, like Tagore, but maybe a little more, introducing some technical explanation for the journey of the soul. Okay, because it's always the big jihad versus the small jihad. Okay, the small jihad is geopolitics and history, and the big jihad is the epistemological journey and history too. Okay, because from the standpoint of a philosopher king, philosophy is the journey from acacia to theoria in its core. But what is happening outside in terms of events is only the superficial layer of the core journey, if you want.
Mm-hmm. You say the word. As soon as you decide it, we will bring it out and read it. So if you want to do it next reading,
okay, cool.
Next reading.
Did we finish the prophet? Yes, we finished the prophet.
Yeah. We're at the vision.
So yeah, that would be cool if we take 1 or 2 sessions to read the Divine Melody, and after that we read the vision. It would be just perfect.
That's what we'll do then. Okay, good. All right, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Ciao.
Thank you, guys.
Thank
Good
you.
morning.
Good
Bye-bye.
night.
Bye.
Good night.